Forum. I'm a principal with Risk Masters International. We advise businesses on risk management in operations, technology, and cybersecurity. And prior to joining Risk Masters, I was with Deloitte for 15 years as a director in information technology. At Deloitte, I had the opportunity to work with Deloitte's rather extensive cybersecurity group, and I have the pleasure to introduce to you today Andrew Douglas. Andrew is a director in that group, and within his activities in the group, he leads the White Hat activities, the White Hat section, and he has significant industry experience in financial services, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, conducting the whole range of White Hat activities that you read about in the press. These are red teams, penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and the whole gamut of strategic and advisory and tactical input to these firms. And so with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Andrew to talk to us about White Hat hackers and how White Hat hackers might be of service in furthering the goals that we are looking to achieve out of the BGF. Andrew, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joined today from around the world. So I do appreciate your time to talk today about White Hat hacking. And certainly I think it's a subject which is pretty entertaining and relatively interesting, and so hopefully after I've given a talk around what White Hat hacking is and how it applies in the global environment, and perhaps some of the issues around it, I know that we've already received some questions from folks on various topics they'd like to cover, so I look forward to a little bit of dialogue at the end of this as well. But getting into that, I think we probably will start here with an introduction around what White Hat hacking is and sort of set some of the baseline here. And I appreciate that folks on the line come from a number of different backgrounds, from an academic perspective, from a government perspective, as well as folks from industry. And so certainly it's good to have people on the same page around what White Hat hacking is and isn't, and talk through some of the terminology. And so certainly when we talk about White Hat hacking, what that means to me is really individuals who are using information security techniques and tools to help improve the state of cybersecurity for an organization, for a product, for a system, but really using those techniques to understand what the vulnerabilities and exposures are based on using techniques and tactics which may be used in the real world against those systems or products or against the organization. And so typically when you think about White Hat hacking, you're thinking about people really challenging the environment. So challenging, hey, is this product secure? Is this organization secure? Can we potentially do things which weren't intended or misuse the systems in a way that could cause harm or it could cause loss to the operator of that system or that product, and using those techniques and tools to really identify those things and get ahead of the game. And White Hat hacking, if you think about it, is not necessarily a new endeavor. It's certainly been around for the 15 years of my professional career. But if you go back in time and think about things that happened even during the World War II, where you had the reverse engineering of the Enigma machine to help the Allies during World War II, that was an example of using White Hat hacking type techniques to reverse engineer and gain an advantage to help the world in that scenario. So when we think about White Hat hacking, it's important to distinguish what a White Hat hacker does, and when you look at White Hat hacking, typically you're looking at why the individual is performing the activities that they are. So they're using techniques which may be used by cyber criminals, by the bad guys to attack systems, but they're doing it in a way to benefit society. And so when I think about White Hat hacking, I think about the ability to help the global community be more prosperous, be more resilient, be more trustworthy, and be safe. And if you think about the way that the world is interconnected now, be it through the Internet of Things, be it through global e-commerce, etc. There is a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. And even in specific industries, if you took transportation or if you took life sciences and healthcare, there are a lot of opportunities for those industries to be impacted by cyber events. And white hat hacking is the ability to identify what can go wrong in those processes through a controlled means of testing them and get out ahead of those situations. So as an example that I would bring up would be around transportation. And so we are getting into the situation where we have connected vehicles. And obviously vehicles are a real-world object where if they are impacted, that can have some real kinetic effects around the world. And so if you look at the ability of using techniques such as white hat hacking to understand the vulnerabilities and what these systems may be exposed to and get ahead of those and remediate or mitigate the risks that are presented, and it presents a real opportunity to help keep the world safer, make it more resilient and trustworthy. So, talking a little bit further, we've obviously mentioned white hats, and so some of the people on the line may have also heard other terms as well, such as grey hats and black hats, all the different color of hats. And I think it is important to sort of distinguish the different flavors of hats. And really, from my perspective, it's a continuum of from white to black, and it's often hard to distinguish exactly where someone sits on that spectrum because it can actually be impacted by the intent of the person, where they're doing this particular activity, local rules, customs, regulations, and laws, and other factors as well. So, typically what we would define as a white hat hacker is someone who has some level of authorization to perform the activities that they're doing. And so an example might be if a white hat hacker is engaged by a company to perform certain activities to test their systems. A grey hat hacker is someone who may be doing that testing, but they may not have the same level of authorization to do it, or it may be in a grey area. But typically their intent is still positive. They're attempting to understand weaknesses or vulnerabilities in a system or a product, maybe not with the manufacturer or the owner's consent, but they have some level of reasonable intent. And then sliding down on the spectrum, you would get to the black hats, and really that's when you start talking about people who are testing systems because they wish to do harm or they want to monetize weaknesses in those systems. And so that's where you get cyber criminals, nation-state actors, hacktivists, and cyber vandals who are really targeting systems or different goals, but they're targeting it with very negative intentions. And again, the real difference between these individuals is why they're doing it and the level of authorization that they have. And so the line between what's a white hat and what's a grey hat can be a little vague, as I mentioned before, depending on the level of authorization. And there certainly are a lot of public policy interests involved with when you consider who is a white hat, who's a grey hat, and potentially even who's a black hat hacker. And again, it comes down to the level of intent, and I would also sort of put it out there as being sort of analogous to a whistleblower type situation. Obviously, in public policy, there is discussion often on what do we do with whistleblowers who are blowing the whistle on some activity which may not necessarily be positive for society. How do you handle those situations where they may have breached a law or a regulation, but their intent was positive? And I think in the hacking community, again, there can be circumstances where that happens, and certainly here in the United States, there have been a number of cases around people's intent, specifically around regulations such as the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. When does someone who is breaking into a cell phone or testing a cell phone, when is that a grey hat activity and where they may be breaching a law versus when it is an acceptable and legitimate public policy interest that people will be able to have access to these devices and test these devices. So the reality is it can be very blurred. So who actually acts as a white hat hacker? In the real world, it comes down normally to a couple of different sets of people. So there are certainly plenty of external companies who offer white hat hacking as a service, who run these sorts of testing for large organizations, small organizations around the world. Certainly a lot of organizations now have their own internal resources to perform white hat hacking type services, and really their role within an organization is to challenge that organization, perhaps step outside of the norms or the culture of that organization, and challenge, hey, if someone was taking an interest in us and wanted to break into us, how would they go about it? How would we defend against it? And let's have a look to see whether we are vulnerable. Sometimes the white hat hacker could be an external party who isn't engaged by an organization. And so you might have security researchers who are performing white hat hacking. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we call bug bounty programs and sort of the rise of companies looking to use white hat hackers in some non-traditional ways a little later on. And then sometimes it can be customers or end users who are looking at the products that they've purchased or the systems that they operate to identify weaknesses so that they can be better defended, and communicating those through back to the developers or the manufacturers. And as I mentioned before, there is a difference between obviously white hats and black hats at different ends of the spectrum, but some of it comes down to intent, and certainly white hat hackers do follow typically a set of rules, and those rules can vary between different white hats, between what they're testing, and frankly in different parts of the world what those rules may be. But typically they come down to having something called a rules of engagement, which really sets the boundaries around, okay, what is acceptable behavior if I'm performing white hat hacking? And so an example of that might be you can test the system, but you can't test the people, or you shouldn't test the people. And so if you were testing an organization, you may be looking at their technology, but not necessarily going after their people and trying to socially engineer those people. Sometimes it's in scope, sometimes it's out of scope, and the rules of engagement help paint those lines and show you how to keep inside them. As well as that, there's typically rules around responsible disclosure, and some of those rules can be more community norms within the security community, as well as agreements with commercial white hat hackers around how they can disclose the information to the organization or to a third party. But there can be some blurring of lines as well. So certainly a white hat hacker can blur the lines between what they've got in their rules of engagement and what they need to be successful to actually complete the mission that they've been set. And it is something which everyone who performs white hat hacking struggles with, because we know that the bad guys have a set of tools and tactics and techniques which don't respect organizational boundaries and certainly don't respect the rules of engagement. Some of the other terms that you may hear as you talk about white hat hacking, you might hear about white box and black box testing. And I did want to avoid some confusion there. It's unfortunate that we talk about white hats and we talk about white boxes, and really white hat hacking versus black hat hacking is really who's doing it and why they're doing it. If you get into white box testing and black box testing, you're really talking more about how you're doing it. So a white box test would be one where you have a lot of information about the system you're testing, as opposed to a black box test, which is where you don't have much information or any information about what you're testing, and you're treating it as a literal black box. So I did want to just mention that, just to avoid some confusion that occasionally arises. So then why is white hat hacking so important? As I mentioned, it's increasingly important as the world digitalizes, as the world becomes more connected. And frankly, having been in the industry for 15 years, certainly we've seen very much an evolution in how people are using white hat hacking, and frankly the need for it as well. If you went back 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the attacking that went on, a lot of the white hat activity was focused on discrete products, which were often used by enterprises, and the impact of the hacking was to help improve individual discrete products, normally very much on the digital side of the fence. Nowadays, I think with the rate of change that you have within technology, so if you think about mobile applications, you think about what's happening with the cloud, you think about new services that seem to sprout up every day, I think the focus of a lot of white hat hacking activity has been how do we protect the common good through attacking of these new platforms and identifying vulnerabilities and sharing that information back with the people developing those products. And I think the reality for a lot of companies who are making software and hardware systems today is that they have a very tough task balancing information security requirements and what they want to do to protect their customers versus being first to market, having that first mover advantage, and it is something that organizations struggle with. And so certainly white hat hackers provide that extra layer or that extra set of eyes to help identify and educate these companies around their potential risks, especially for smaller companies where they may not be able to necessarily have that in-house experience to help to self-identify those issues. So then, how does white hat hacking typically work, and what's the process that you go through? And again, it very much depends on what it is you're testing, or what the white hat hacker is focused on, and really it comes down to a goal. And a goal will be to identify if a particular product is secure, identify if an organization is safe, or any other goal that is altruistic in motive to help with safety, the resilience, the protection of an organization. And so nowadays we typically look at white hat hacking across a couple of different dimensions, and so those would be digital dimensions, so testing of hardware and software. How do these things work across the internet, work across other networks, wireless, etc., and how are they protected? We look at the physical elements, so can the actual device or system be compromised either by someone taking that device and opening it up and looking at the contents of the system and how it's protected. It could be physical in the sense of how these systems or how an organization is physically guarded. So certainly, whether you can get into buildings or environments where restrictions are removed and you have greater access to the systems that you're targeting. Or it could be social, where you look at the human element of security and whether the right controls are in place to prevent security incidents from occurring through social engineering, through phishing, through those sorts of techniques which are increasingly used by attackers to target organizations. And the typical approach that a white hat hacker would take is really based around performing a number of activities associated with that goal. And so typically it would be starting with an information gathering exercise where the attacker or the white hat hacker looks to identify, well, what information is available about my target? What can I get from public sources, from non-public sources? How can I set the environment and understand it before I even start the activities that I'm going to perform? And where do I focus my time to replicate what a black hat hacker would do, and what would they potentially go after? And then you get into the probing of the environment that you're testing. So again, looking at the digital, looking at the physical, looking at the social, that can take different forms. It can be, literally running tools to identify what services are accessible on the systems that are in scope. It can be physically examining physical sites to see whether there's access, whether there's radio connections that you can connect to from safe locations. It can be physically opening up boxes to see what kind of connectivity do I have with this particular product, or it can be social. It can be identifying employees or people associated with an organization and targeting various people. Then the next stage after that would typically be vulnerability analysis, which is where you try and find the actual holes that you're going to exploit. And again, that can be through examining the services which are exposed to the internet. It can be attempting to gain access to facilities. It can be running particular campaigns against individuals, whether that be phishing campaigns, phone call campaigns, etc., in a controlled way to identify if there's weaknesses which would allow access to credentials or other information. And then you get into the exploitation phase, which is now that you've got some vulnerability, or you know about some vulnerability, can you exploit it to gain, to achieve the goal that you set? And so again, that may be running particular software exploits. It could be plugging new equipment into an environment. It could be trying to reuse information you've received through a social engineering campaign and attacking the human element. And then you complete your mission. And again, depending on what the white hat hacker has focused on, that mission completion could be identifying, can I get access to the personal information that I was looking to see if it was protected? If I can get access to that, can I remove it from the environment? Can I copy it? Can I alter it in some way that would actually enable a black hat doing this to gain or cause an impact? And so really those are the sorts of steps that you go through, and certainly over the last couple of decades, the arsenal of tools available to white hat hackers has greatly increased. And so there are now a number of both commercial tools for performing white hat hacking type activity. There's a number of open source tools managed by the information security community, which are broadly used for performing white hat hacking. And frankly, the tools we talk about when we talk about white hat hacking activity can range from very expensive commercial tools used to target organizations on a broad scale, or frankly, it could be as simple as a web browser on your computer and testing whether a particular application is vulnerable with weak passwords or other common application security flaws. So when you think about the tools that a white hat hacker can use, it really can be as simple as just the laptop in front of them or even their smartphone. It's not always the $1 million box that sometimes you see in the movies, which does magic things. You know, and I think when we think about the way white hat hackers typically operate, it's very much an investigative process, and I think that's something for people to sort of understand and realize that in some respects it's very much also academic. So you have people who are typically fairly smart, have a natural curiosity, and want to understand how a particular system or product works and how that could be exploited. And so through that process of being very investigative, what you have is you have you know, any number of techniques being used, and also a natural desire to share that information with the community, involve others, ask people questions. And so often with white hat hacking, you do have that community built up around it in terms of people wanting to share that information, and that has been an issue in the white hat community in terms of how you share that information, what level of information you share, and how you do it responsibly, especially in the face of challenges. And that challenge could be that the information you're sharing is very sensitive. It could be very valuable to black hats and others. It also could be information that the owner or the manufacturer of a system or a product doesn't want you to share. And again, going back to that whistleblower analogy, there is a line that needs to be drawn somewhere between a public interest to share that information and make sure that it is used versus responsible disclosure and making sure that the manufacturers or the producers of systems and products have an opportunity to remediate those issues and to reduce the potential impact for their customers and society, and avoiding irresponsible disclosure where information is shared and it's reused or misused immediately to the harm of others. And then finally, what I would say around white hat hacking is it really is a discipline which is starting to take form in terms of how people come into the industry and talent development. And so certainly if you went back 10 or 15 years ago, there wasn't necessarily a clear path as to how someone became a white hat hacker. I think over the last few years, there's really been a drive from universities and colleges and from industry as well to define pathways for people to get into this career and to become white hat hackers, because frankly there is a high demand for it, as there is across most of the cyber discipline at the moment, as well as a real need from a volume perspective, and frankly it can also be a very lucrative career option for people. And I think there is a need to harness the talent that does exist as people come out of schools and out of colleges to help benefit the world and make it more safe, prosperous, trustworthy, by engaging with those people and using that natural curiosity and skills that they have to really test and get ahead of the black hat community. So, Alan, hopefully that was an introduction for folks on white hat hacking and some of the background as to what white hats versus black hats are, some of the process that white hat hackers use, and so some of the benefits of white hat hacking. But I know we have a number of questions as well.
Right. Andrew, thank you very much. You've certainly given a thoughtful, comprehensive, and insightful explanation of what white hat hacking is. A lot more depth and understanding than one gleans from the press and this simplified good guy, bad guy perspective. Let me ask you some of the questions that we've received, some of which you answered in your presentation, but some were not. And so I'd like to start with a series of questions from Tuan, which all revolve around the ultimate role for white hat hackers in, if you will, an understanding of global civility in the cyberspace. As you know, the Boston Global Forum is looking to develop an agenda of norms to be adopted by the G7, and hopefully at some point those norms will be adopted. What can the white hat hackers do, and how can they play in maintaining, managing, enforcing, governing this type of better world that we're aspiring to?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alan. And I think when you look at the cybersecurity proposal that the Boston Global Forum has, a lot of the norms and a lot of the concerns that come out through that agenda are addressed in part through white hat hacking. And so if you look at things like making sure that critical infrastructure for countries is secure, making sure that information on vulnerabilities is disclosed in a timely manner so that it can't be repurposed and weaponized against countries, against companies, and against individuals. I think white hat hacking serves a role amongst a number of different cyber capabilities to really provide that set of eyes to ensure that the systems and the networks which are run within different countries, which support some of the very important aspects of the global community, whether it be global transportation, whether it be safe food and drug administration, whether it be healthcare, whether it be critical utilities, are protected.
Thank you. You had mentioned during your presentation bug bounty programs. Can you talk about that? Let us know what that is and perhaps where that's headed.
So bug bounty programs are a really interesting and novel approach that a number of organizations are taking now to engage with white hat community. And I think where this kind of stemmed from was, for a long time, there were various mechanisms for disclosing vulnerabilities to organizations. And often they were very simple mechanisms, whether it's distributing it onto a security research mailing list, whether it being trying to email someone at the company and identify someone that they could talk to. And so there were very simple mechanisms. And I think a number of companies realized that there was a lot of talent and a lot of value in being able to engage with security researchers and folks who may fall more in the grey hat area, but kind of bring them out of the shadows to some extent, and leverage their talent, crowdsource their ideas and their innovation to help protect people and help companies actually protect their customers through identifying weaknesses in systems. And so what a bug bounty program really is an organization saying, look, we acknowledge that there's an interest in attacking our systems. We acknowledge that security researchers have a legitimate role. We're going to offer a program where we will reward in some way the activities that have been performed by the white hat hackers. Again, putting some controls around it. So most bug bounty programs will have a defined scope of what is acceptable behavior by the security researchers. They'll have defined methods of communicating and disclosing information and what is acceptable in terms of what sort of bugs they're looking for. So it's a way to sort of harness and control some of the activity which would occur against these organizations anyway, and use the information to really support and benefit the community.
Thank you. Another question has to do, you mentioned the white hat hackers play by the rules. Well, the black hatters don't.
Yeah.
Are there some inherent limitations to the strengths of white hat hacking, that you might always be a step behind, you might fall short in resources, your best people will be recruited to be black hat hackers in turn? What are the natural limits that you encounter, and how do you overcome those?
So I think there's a couple of things. Certainly there are limits. And some organizations will push those limits further than others. And certainly for the organizations we work with, there are some organizations where they've got a very large concern around the availability of their systems. They've got a concern around the impact that white hat type activities can take on their organization, and so they're very clear in their rules of engagement, the limits of what can be taken. So there is a challenge there, and often it's a matter of talking through with the organization. What are the threats you're actually exposed to? Let's look at what your actual exposure is, what tactics and techniques individuals are using against you, and coming away with a plan to test those in a reasonable fashion. Now, the reality is, and as I mentioned before, the black hat hackers have the fantastic advantage that they don't have to paint within the lines. They don't have to follow rules of engagement, and they don't have to respect organizational boundaries. And so I think white hat hacking is one capability in the arsenal, but the way I kind of look at this is organizations need to remain secure, but they also need to remain vigilant, so monitoring and detecting for this type of activity, and then they also need to remain resilient, which is having the capability, knowing that you can't test for everything, knowing that the black hat hackers have this advantage in terms of not needing to follow the rules. Resilient really means, well, how do you respond and how do you recover from this sort of activity? So I see white hat hacking as one of these capabilities in this arsenal, and a good white hat hacking program will feed into understanding on the vigilance and resilience side, what your capabilities to detect the white hat hacker are and get ahead of them, and what your abilities and capabilities are to be responsive and recover if the white hat hacker gets in. And so when you consider that whole sort of set of capabilities, I think white hat hacking has a role, but it's not the only thing that organizations need to be doing.
Thank you. On a related note, how do you see the cooperation and interaction between the industry white hat hackers like yourself and the various cyber experts in government who may be wearing black, white, gray, and any other color hat as well. How is that today? How could it be in the future? Is there a state we want to get to that is the best of all worlds to enhance cybersecurity and harmony for all of us?
Yeah, and it's an excellent question, because to some degree the extent on both sides and the capabilities on both sides may be a little unknown. And so I think the state at the moment is that there is information sharing between commercial entities and government organizations. I think that there are countries which obviously have significant cyber defense programs and cyber weapon capabilities, and so I think there's always going to be a natural tension between releasing that information. And so I don't think we're ever going to get to a state where there's going to be complete openness between what the art of the possible is in the commercial space, because there is competitive advantage there, or in the federal or the nation state in terms of having defense and being able to use that to their advantage. I think what you're seeing in the community, though, is and through regulation, some of the presidential directives here in the US around cyber information sharing, is a desire to increase that level of communication. And I think many organizations are taking those steps to, one, participate more in community organizations and information sharing centers, often based on industry, to actually share that information, and you will see commercial entities involved with that as well. So I think there's a growing call for the information sharing to increase. I think the ideal state we're probably never going to get to, because as I said, there are other factors at play, be it competitive or be it in terms of defense and protecting the nation states. So I think there's been progress made. I think that there are going to be hiccups along the way, and there are going to be some challenges as well. And so when you think about some of the challenges, certainly over the last 12 months or so, there have been a number of agreements or a number of treaties between countries which have potentially included cyber weapons and restricting the dual use export of cyber technologies. And there is very much a tension there between, look, we need to share this information, we don't want to have a chilling effect on security researchers, versus we don't want to make the tools widely open to anyone to reuse from a black hat perspective. So there is always going to be a natural tension
there. Thank you. Could you talk a bit more? You mentioned weapons, you mentioned dual use. Can you talk a bit more about dual use?
Yeah, so this is something which I think as a community, as a security community, we've been struggling with for a while, and that is the reality that put in the wrong hands, a lot of the tools that the white hat hackers are using or that legitimate security researchers are producing can be reused or leveraged against organizations by black hat. And so that's where the whole notion of dual use comes in. And I think what we've seen over time is that it's been very difficult for governments to restrict the flow of this information, even though there has been a natural reaction to try to do that. And so certainly, as I mentioned, there's been certain agreements recently, and I think the current state of play is that typically cyber weaponry has been taken off the table as a dual use category in many agreements, because I think there is a desire from the global community that you do make cyber tools available to meet the sort of objectives that you have in the Boston Global Forum G7 agenda in terms of protecting critical infrastructure, protecting society, protecting supply chain, and other elements within society. So there, I think from a go forward perspective, if you look at some of the court decisions here in the US around dual use, etc., I think it may become less of an issue in the future, because I think people are coming to the reality that it's very hard to control the dissemination of these tools as weapons. Unlike perhaps the export of tanks or guns or ammunition, You're not dealing with a physical asset here normally. You're dealing with lines of code which can be transmitted in any way possible, and controlling that is incredibly difficult.
Andrew, thank you. One last question about industry investment. Do you feel that industry investment trends are moving in the right direction, that industries are adequately investing in cybersecurity? And one data point that might interest you if you had not already seen it, the Wall Street Journal this morning reported that around the U.S., average insurance rates for cyber breach have dropped 16% on the basis that there's a lot more security today. So is that a testament to you guys doing a great job? Or just a lot more investment in cybersecurity?
So I think there's been a lot more investment in cybersecurity generally. I think some of that has been driven by particular events in certain countries and in certain industries. And so I'll take an example, and it's US-centric. After the Target breach, Target being a very large retailer in the US, there was a lot of interest from other retailers and a lot of concern from their board of directors, from their audit committees, from really their governance structures as to, are we the next organization to fall, as an example. And so I think over the last couple of years, there's been a significant increase in the level of spending. I think the regulators in many countries are really taking a hard look at cybersecurity and driving some of that as well. And so certainly here in the US, we've had increasing regulation and frankly more detailed guidance from organizations like the FFIEC in relation to financial providers, etc. And so all of those things are driving increased investment. And then I think the reality is as well that perhaps the sorts of impact that cyber events have been having on organizations has changed as well. And so that's driving investment. So if you went back 10 years ago, a lot of cyber events were probably more in line with virus outbreaks, perhaps the destruction of data. Now you have some very game-changing tactics being used against organizations. And so currently things like ransomware, where we have hospitals here in the US who have had to pay ransoms to effectively get access back to their systems and data. We've had organizations who have had almost their entire infrastructure destroyed from a logical perspective, and have almost had to rebuild from ground up. And so those can be very existential threats to an organization, and certainly raise the awareness of cybersecurity within organizations. And I think also there's been a growing concern around how supply and information chains work within an industry and the downstream impacts of a cyber event at a supplier, a vendor, a contractor, etc. And so organizations are really investing across the board, again, often following that sort of secure, vigilant, resilient model to improve the state of cybersecurity, their ability not only to defend, but also to monitor and detect, and to be more resilient in the face of the fact that everyone gets breached. It happens at some stage.
Andrew, thank you very much. We're done with the questions, and I appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today.
No problem. Thanks, Alan, and thanks to the Boston Global Forum for this opportunity to talk today.
Thank you.